Evaporator case removal. We're going to start today by removing an evaporator case. This is an evaporator case removal on a 1995 or 94 140 chassis Mercedes-Benz. We're going to show you some of the little hidden secrets that Mercedes has used to assemble this dash, and we're going to hopefully avoid any damage. We want to inspect the seats. You want to be careful when you're working so you don't tear any seats. This is a major job. First thing we'll do is we'll move the seats forward. Okay, this is going to gain access to the bolts that hold the console in place. The console bolts are located in the rear, one here and one here. After we've slid the seat all the way forward, we will be able to remove the two attaching bolts to the console, one right there and there, and also on the other side we'll do the same. Now with the bolts removed, we're going to leave the bolts that hold the back of the console. We're going to leave them in the back here because we're not really going to spend much time here. Right now we're going to remove the rear vent. And I'll show you how that's done. We're going to save that rear vent till later. We may not have to remove that. We're just going to go ahead right now and move the seats back to the all the way back position. I'm going to slide these seats all the way back. Now with the seats moved all the way back, we're going to go ahead and remove the instrument cluster and the wood on the console. One warning is on the SRS, anything having to do with the airbag, you don't want to have it unplugged and then turn the key on, because what happens is the computer will give a code that there's a malfunction and you'll have to have it reset either at the dealership or unless you have some elaborate equipment in your shop. If you have that equipment, you probably aren't watching this tape. So you want to move your seats back, move the steering wheel to the further down position and all the way back. And now we're going to remove the instrument cluster and the center vents and the wood on the console. For dash removal, we have a hook. Mercedes, you can purchase this at Mercedes-Benz very inexpensively. That's the part number. And just so we can get a shot on that part number, I'm not sure if we're... Okay, it's 140-589-0233. Now, okay, we're going to take this tool and we're going to hook it on the sides right here and then pull the dash out, being careful not to hurt the dash. Okay, as you see, we've pulled the dash out, and there's hooks on the side where this tool can reach over and grab it, and then you pull this out. Once it's out, then go ahead and unplug the back of it. You notice that there are just 4 plugs that plug into the back of the dash. These are the 4 plugs, and then the instrument cluster is removed. Okay, we're going to move on to the console now. We're going to remove the push button controls for the windows, that wood panel, and we'll start by turning on the key to move the shift lever. And we're going to open this up, and there's a screw. Once we remove this ashtray, that we can look down in there, and there's a screw right here that we can remove. We have to remove this little screw, loosen it, and this tray will come out, and then we'll move on. Now once we've removed this screw, we'll close this door. Well, we can pull the door up and remove this door. It slides out of the slot there, and we can take this door off with this one screw. You see, we have just loosened that screw. We didn't remove it, and the door slides off. Next, we're going to go to we can close that, and there's screws located down inside here that we're going to remove. So you look inside, and you have two screws here that hold this wood panel. We're also going to remove, there's this ring right here. This ring is removed by prying underneath. You can just raise up underneath this, and it starts to come up. Then take your fingers. You got to be careful not to damage the wood. And you just pull this up. Okay, that's up. That now gives us, this is a locking. You'll notice there's two tabs in the front that are closer together than in the back. That'll go in like that. Sometimes I've found that this doesn't go down tight around the edges. You have to grind a little bit right in here to make it seat just right. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get the tool and loosen the two screws located up inside here. At this time, before we get the proper tools to remove the hex screws under here for this dash piece, we're going to go ahead and disconnect the battery. The battery is located in the trunk. Okay, we're going into the trunk of the car right now, and we're going to locate the batteries on the right hand side. And we can take this box out, and you have the battery. Now we're going to disconnect the negative terminal and then continue. Okay, these are the two screws that we removed from inside here, which locks in this wood panel. Okay, and we're going to put all the screws that come out of here into the ashtray so that we keep everything together. For assembly will be much easier. We're going to put these things in the trunk of the car. Okay, next we lift up this wood panel. Sometimes you have to push back, reach underneath to push it up to get it started. Just being careful of the wood that's around here. So that this will come up, but sometimes we have to push back and be careful with it. And then we'll lift it out of there, moving the shifter, and we can go ahead and unplug the attachments under it. Okay, with the console unplugged, we have 7 plugs. Alright, so we'll go here and we'll look, and we have 7 plugs. We have 1 up here, 2 over here, and over here you have 3. It's a good idea at this time to go ahead and, for the 3 that are on one side, that will make it easier, we'll just put a little wire tie around here, and then we'll go ahead and move on to the console. Okay, we're going to remove 2 screws for the console that are down in there. There's one on this side and one over on this side. So we're going to remove those 2 screws. We're also going to insert the radio removal tools. Each one is inserted into the radio. You can purchase these at the Mercedes-Benz dealer. You have, and they say top on them, so you can't really, you want to put them in the way they say. And they go in. Once they've gone in, they're locked in, the radio pulls right out. So we're going to remove the radio and unplug everything. You'll have to get the radio code either from the dealership or if the customer has a radio code prior to working on the car. Notice that the radio, with the radio removed and unplugged, there's a series of cables. This is which attach to it. There's actually 3 plugs, one that's joined together, one separate, and this plug here. This is the anti-theft piece. Plugs into the back of the radio. Now we're going to go ahead and remove this after I take out the 2 screws that I pointed to. Okay, these are the size of the screws that we removed. And what we're going to do is we're going to go in here, and there's 2 more screws up underneath here and here, which are holding this wood piece in. So we're going to remove these 2 screws, and then we'll be taking this wood console, we'll lift it. Now with the 2 screws removed up underneath here, we're going to lift this piece up out of here, and this will come out. This is how we remove the wood here. And you'll have to be careful when you're removing to be able to clear the switches when pulling down and pulling out. Okay. It's best to move the shifter to all the way to low position so that when you lift this out, you can pull it all the way up, because it gets stuck a little bit up underneath here. And then you'll go ahead and unplug the ashtray or the seat heaters, the cigarette lighter. Start to detach the plugs from behind the wood panel. Okay, you'll want to pry up underneath these clips on each side to release the switches. And then what you do is, once you've pried and disconnected them, because you have different little clips you have to push down, once you get it disconnected, you can have the whole switch assembly. Leave it plugged in, just leave it there, and then you have one plug that came undone from here. There again, it would be a good idea to put a little wire tie with these 2, and that way you know that these 3, all this goes together in the front panel. Also, you want to notice how when we removed the wood and unplugged the ashtray, this car was equipped with some options, some seat heaters, which we unplugged. So you'll want to keep these, see how they're coming through here and here. Now there's a insert right here, and we're going to remove this insert. It's a little difficult. You have to pry up, and it has to come undone. It's clipped here and up underneath. There's some little areas, but this will come out. Okay. Now we're putting the parts. We're putting all the screws that we take out of the console here into this ashtray, so that we'll have all the screws, the 4 screws that we took out We're going to remove a few more console screws because we're going to take this console out. So we've got 2 screws here that we're going to detach. And then we're going to remove the AC with the screws right here and over here. We're going to remove this. Okay, we've taken the 2 screws out, slide this out, and these plugs come undone. You just press in here and they just unplug, and then this unit is out. We're putting everything in the trunk so that we have everything in order. These are pretty easy to identify plugs, and you just have 2 of them for the AC control. So we're going to remove it, and now what we have, so we have the console open. We still are going to unbolt the 2 screws we showed you earlier at the top, and 2 right here. And then we'll move on. Okay, we've removed the upper screws in the console. Now we're going to lift this up. This is the lower portion of it. Down inside here, you can lift up a. There's a flap in here that we can see that you can, along this edge, you lift this up. Okay, this flap gives us access to the cable controls to the rear vent. And we're going to detach the front and the rear vent cables so that when we remove the the console, we'll be able to just leave this in place, the forward cable, and remove the back cable and console. Okay, we're going to go ahead and remove this rear cover by putting that dash tool in here, and we pull this after we remove the front cable. Therefore, we'll be able to unplug a few attachments, one on the top, and then we'll be able to remove this and slide it out with the with this removed. We slitted this out. It pulls out, and the cable was detached from the center. We just slide it out, take out the rear light, and then we lifted the console. We just pull it up because we have those bolts detached from the rear. Now we're going to go ahead and remove the console. Okay. Okay, you see the console, when we lifted the back, it came loose from the front. And we're just going to... Okay, with the console removed, the ductwork is exposed to the rear. We detached one cable that went up into the console. Now we're going to address the center portion. Right here we're going to use the ignition key, and we're going to turn the key and insert a pin and remove this cylinder. Okay, we've used this tool and turned the key from an open position halfway in between the lock. There's a hole, and you insert it, which will release the tumbler. Remove the tumbler and put tape around this, because if you remove the key, all the tumblers will come out, so be careful. And down inside you'll see a screw, and we're going to go ahead and remove that screw, which will then remove this push button. We're going to remove the glove compartment. There's tabs in here. They have locking tabs. Underneath each one, you'll find a you have to pry up the little tab, which is the locking tab. Once this tab is pried up, okay, once we raise this tab up, we can remove the button. There's 4 of these buttons in the glove box that holds the glove box in place. So therefore, we'll remove these, and then we're going to take this light out, and we'll take this insert out. Then we'll be able to undo this lock, which is connected to this release button. That'll cause this to come out easier, and then we'll gain access and disconnect the cable. Okay, we've removed the light, the glove box light, and this is the plug for it. That'll just slide back in there. Now we're going to remove the line. Okay, we're pulling the insert out, which exposes behind the dash. We're going to remove this. Well, we actually could leave it there, but I'm going to remove this cable. It's connected and runs across to our push button, so I'll get this push button out. 2 screws attach it right up in here. So we're going to go ahead and remove these screws. Now we've undone the glove box latch, and now we're pulling out the cable. You have to feed the cable, make sure it's not attached. And now we're going to disconnect the cable and remove our lock, unplug the light. Okay. Note the wires. This is the screw that was down inside there. You can leave the screw with it. We're going to just disconnect this cable and then slide this cable out and remove this, and it's out. And we'll move up to this portion here. Okay, now we're going to remove these 2 screws in the back of the flap, and then we're going to be able to pull this mechanism out. This customer happens to have a radar detector in here, so usually there's a phone, and if you have the phone, there's a tab on the very top of the phone that's in here. You press down on the tab and pull the phone out. That's how you remove the phone that's in there. There'll be a little tab at the top of the phone. Okay, this is the top. It comes out with the screws. We'll remove that, and then we'll gain access to 2 screws in the top of the center and take this out. But before we do that, we're going to go ahead and well, right now I think what we'll do first is we're going to remove this carpet. So we're going to lift this ledge here, and we're going to remove all the carpet and padding so that we can gain access to any wires that we need to. Okay, we're removing the carpet after we release the sides. It's just a little folding process, and we're going to take that carpet out of the car. Then we're going to remove this lower ductwork. Okay, now we're going to remove the windshield posts, and that is done by pulling the ceiling strip straight down, then grabbing underneath of the molding for it. All you have to do and then is pull this out. Okay, it's held in by clips, and when you remove the clips, you have the molding here. Okay, now we're going to there's a cover right here that we remove for the speaker access. So we're going to remove this with a screwdriver, a small screwdriver. It'll lift up. We'll remove it, and then there'll be 2 screws under here, and we'll remove this screen now that we've removed this cover. Okay, we just lifted this up, and we're going to remove this, and then we're going to get to the 2 screws that are, there's 1 screw right here that we'll remove. Let's see, we'll get a better view from here. There's the screw that I'm referring to from the outside, and then we'll remove this screen. Once we've removed the screw, we get a hold of the outer edge and push upward, and then lifting it, it's clipped under the sides here, so you lift upward and out and remove it. Okay, then we're going to remove this screw and this screw, which will remove this ductwork. Okay, now we've removed the two screws here, and now we've lifted the little tab right here and right here, and as we lift these tabs we pull lightly, and which releases this air duct, and now that air duct is removed. There's the tabs that we lifted up right there. Okay, now we reach in here and take out some of the other air duct. Now what I do is we'll place these pieces in a pile on left side and right side so we're not confused. Now we've gained access to some of the bolts. We have one dash bolt there, and we have a dash bolt up top here. You can see it from here. You see there's right there's another bolt. This is going to be repeated on the other side of the car as we go over to the other side. We're also going to remove the carpet and the post and speaker on the other side. While we're on this side where we've just removed some of the air duct, we're going to go up underneath. This is where the SRS airbag is. There's a plug right on the side of it, and all we've got to do is we want to reach up there. You might use a little screwdriver and pry a little plug off the side of this airbag. And once the airbag is been unplugged, it stays in place. You don't have to remove all of it. We're on the driver's side. We're going to remove the two bolts on the gas pedal to remove the gas pedal so that we can remove this side carpet which goes up into the console. We're going to remove that. First, right now, what we're going to do is lower this panel. This panel is held in place. We remove this cover up inside. There's a screw that we can gain access to. It's right up inside here. And we'll remove one screw right in here. And then we're going to lower this. I'm going to show you there's two little catches, one here and one here, and we're going to use a little screwdriver to. Okay, now we're going to remove these two screws. There's two screws underneath. We just removed a screw that was up in here. We're going to want to remove this cover. And we're going to slide over here and we're going to remove the attaching screws and fasteners. There's little clips right here and on the other side. We'll get to that in a second. We're going to remove these screws. Okay, now we've removed these two screws and we're pulling this down, and excuse my light there. I'm just trying to get a good spot for this next. There's a clip right in there, and that clip you have to push it with your little screwdriver, and you can once you move this, once you push this little clip, you'll see how it's moved. It's moved down. Once it goes down, you can pull this down. That's released it. We have to go over here to another one, the same as that one right there. Okay, we found the one on the right-hand side of the steering wheel. and we just pushed this little clip and we've released that. So if we can get a little focus on that. Hold on one second. Have to bear with the focusing. What I did is I slid the screwdriver. Once we've removed, let's get a better shot at these because they're a little tricky. You just slide the screwdriver across the top to find it, and you'll see how this works. When you slide the screwdriver across the top, you press down. Once you slide it across and press down, you'll find that this becomes loose. And that is after we've taken the screw out here and one up in here. Now we're going to go underneath, and there's two more screws up underneath here, 2 Phillips screws, and we're going to remove those, and then this will come down. There's one more screw in the back that holds the plastic. So we undid 2 screws. There's a plastic nut at the back of the gas pedal, and you remove that, then this panel will come out. Okay, now the panel's removed, and I'm going to go ahead and finish taking out the gas pedal, and then we're going to move on to the center column. How we're going to loosen this up. It slides on here, and we'll move on to that steering column. Now we've got the floor mat out of the car, and we're going to remove the screw right here that holds this air duct in. Try to keep the screws with each part. I've taken some of the parts that take for instance the screws that came out of this under panel. I removed those and I put them in a pile, just the screws for that lower panel, so that when I go to put it back together, I have the screws which came from this area up underneath. There's a better look at these two little, they're the ones that take a little bit of time to get used to how they work, because there's a little tab, and once you get those, it comes right down. So right now we're gonna go ahead and remove this screw and take this. Okay, now we're gonna remove 2 screws, one here, one over there, that loosens this sliding panel. There's one screw here, one over here, and also we have up underneath here, you'll see a screw facing this way and that way. We're going to remove those 4 screws, and then this will be freed up. Now we've removed the 4 screws from this panel here, and now we're able to move this panel up out of the way, and it'll come loose. And then we can just move this and gain access to our column. Now with the column in this position, this lower position, I'm having a hard time getting this over the edge. So I'm going to go ahead and take these 2 bolts out of the steering column, which will allow it to move more freely, and I'll be able to move this out. Okay, now I've removed this, and I went ahead and removed the side panel like we did on the other side. On the right side, we went over how it pops out. Removed the 2 screws, removed this air duct. I had to come in from behind and push a little bit as I loosened those tabs to get it to come forward. Now I'm going to go down inside, and we're going to go and unplug the light switch. We're not going to take this light switch out, we're just going to unplug it. We're also going to disconnect the cable for the emergency brake release. We're going to go down inside and get the cable in there, and once we get that done, we'll move the emergency brake cable release. Right here, we just took a long pair of needle nose pliers and reached down inside, and as we pulled it, the cable, it comes right out, so there's not a lot involved on disconnecting that. And down inside you're going to find a bolt right there, which is a dash fastening bolt, and there's also another bolt right here, which is a dash fastening bolt. We're going to loosen those up in a few brake lever just by pulling it out. Now I'm going to undo a screw right here and remove the steering column adjusting switch. Now we're moving over to the center console, the rest of the center of the dash, not the console, but we're going to remove this air control, which is held in by two screws, one here and one there. We're going to remove those screws and then remove this. Once we've removed the two screws, there's a tab underneath here and over here that we lift up and pull out at the same time. Then we can remove this unit and unplug it. Now we unplugged the center vent, and the screws used for this are the only tapered screws. Countersunk head are the two for the vent. So what we're doing with each one of these screws to make it easier for assembly is we're putting them back into their most of the places, or leave them in the holes. That way you don't have to root around and try to guess what screws went where. And we just put these back into their hole, and then we'll put this in the trunk with the rest of the parts. Now we're going to remove this little cover. We used a little screwdriver and pried the cover out, and we gain access to a Phillips screw. We're going to remove this screw and then lightly pry behind this panel. This panel comes off, it pops off, and then slides out down here. We'll show you as soon as we remove that. Okay, once we remove the screw here, we can just pull this off and it slides out, held in by tabs that push in. Okay, now we're going to remove these two screws, and we're going to slide this unit out and disconnect 4 cables. Okay, now we've got the screws loose. We put the screws back in their holes again. This just makes putting the right screw in the right hole easier when you go to put this back together. It takes a few minutes right now, but it saves you a lot of fiddling around. There's 4 cables. We're going to disconnect these cables. These are all spring-loaded cables. The center 2 control the center flaps, and the outside control the outside flaps. So we're just going to pull the cables up and take them out of the little loops. It's real easy. Okay, we've got all 4 cables. These are the cables that run to the flaps here, and we've disconnected those from this center control, and we unplugged one light wire, goes in the bottom of it. We've just removed the attaching 4 bolts, one here, one down there, and on the other side there's 2. So I removed those, put those here, and there were 2 bolts on this side up underneath. It supported this lower panel. It supported this panel, and we removed 2 screws. They had the 8mm head. These are the screws. We removed 2 of those, which loosened the dash up. we didn't have to remove this cover. So right now what we're going to do is get ready to loosen 2 more bolts on the dash. So the dash, on the steering column, we're going to remove 2 bolts underneath, and we'll get over there. Here we are on the driver's side, and I'm removing these 2 bolts that hold the steering column up in place. With these removed, I'm going to twist the steering down so that the ignition key and the steering column comes out and down. Okay, once I removed those, I twisted the steering and was able to bring it out of this hole. And as I twisted to the left, I'm able to bring the whole thing down. There was no key in it. I just twist the steering whole column and it brings it down, and then I brought it down below. That leaves everything up top ready to be removed. Okay, with a little pulling, I had to pull on it. We had disconnected the speaker wires at the speakers. After we lowered the steering column, we had to pull. It was hung up on the defrost flaps. When it goes in, it hangs up a little bit there. So it took a little pulling, and then we were able to free it up. Now we're going to bring it out of the car. Now the dash has just been removed, and we're in the process of removing these covers, and we're going to remove this vacuum unit. And right now what we have to do is unbolt this, and that comes up here, and we come across here and here. So we're going to remove this lower support on the passenger side, as well as we're going to remove the insulation cover. There's one over the dash and one over the evaporator case. Okay, now we've removed the bolt in this area. We removed the bolt in this upper area right there, and we've come across, and there's 2 more. There's a nut there and a nut there, and we're going to remove those. And we've removed the lower bolts in this unit right there, and now we're going to remove this support brace. When we remove that, we're going to disconnect this whole complete vacuum housing, not the hoses. We're not going to touch those vacuum hoses. We also removed one additional nut that was down in this area right here, which gave us the ability to remove this arm, leaving these things attached to them. We're not going to disconnect that. And then we're going to take this bracket down. After we remove these 2 nuts, we're going to loosen the bracket underneath, and we're going to get these 2 bolts right up here that we're going to be able to get that bracket the rest of the way out. We have to loosen those 2 in order to remove the bracket. Okay, we've just undone a wire tie right here, and we've loosened everything, undone any wire ties connected to it. Now we're going to remove this panel. Okay, with the panel removed, we turn the back side over, and you can see where there's these slots, and we're going to remove the vacuum box from this panel. The panel from the brace. By pressing down on this tab that was locked into this hole, we were able to slide and separate the bracket from the vacuum housing. Now the vacuum housing will just come out with the evaporator. Now we're going to remove this insulation. Okay, now with the cover removed, we had unplugged. We undid a plug here. We removed the cover, and now what we're going to do is we're going to start to take a few of these wire ties. We're going to take these wire ties off and remove them from the case. We're going to remove this insulation here, and then we're going to go ahead and take the bolt out of this air duct chamber back here, the nut, and we're going to slide this unit back, and we're going to unbolt the airbag relay here, the airbag sensor. We're going to take this out of the way. We're also going to disconnect the cable for the steering lock, for the shifter lockout right here, and we're going to come over here and down here on the vacuum lines. We're going to disconnect at these fittings the green vacuum line. Okay, we've just released this cable connector just by prying and taking a screwdriver, prying under here. We removed the nut. Now we're sliding the housing back, and now we're going to remove it from the car. Now with that removed, we'll remove this insulating pad. And now we'll remove these attaching bolts that we can remove. Just slide this out of the way so when we remove the evaporator, it'll clear. Another look at how everything's going. You'll notice how this little connector snaps in here and then it comes off. And once you get it off, see that little groove? That's where this goes. So it's one of those little things you could forget, and just snaps right in that groove. And now we've removed the airbag relay sensor, and we're working on taking the wires off of the evaporator case. They're attached by different series of wire ties, which we have to disconnect. We've disconnected the cables pop the cables out of the case right here. Each one has a white mark. The white mark snaps in right where it belongs, and what we've done is we've disconnected those. And we're also going to unplug these sensors, these evaporator case sensors, just like that, and we'll just leave them lay. There's one here and one over here. Okay, so we'll take those out. We're just moving everything back out of the way so we can gain access to remove this evaporator case. Right now we're clearing all any vacuum hoses. This part of the case right here is coming out. All of this assembly is coming out together, so we will not disconnect any vacuum hoses attached to diaphragms on the case. All we'll do is 2 hoses back down in there. The lock cable for the shifter, and now we're going to disconnect this bracket here and these brackets right down there. I'm going to undo those nuts. I'm gonna lift the steering column back up in place and just start these bolts to hold the steering column pressure off of it while I work on the car. Okay, the other two bolts to the bracket, this one and this one, I'm going to take those out, and the bracket goes up and down. We have to remove that bracket. Remove those bolts, and now to this bracket we have a nut, and then we take this down. This bracket's used, has two holes, and goes on right there. Okay, it goes on like that, just bolts right up against there. This just rests here. There's no bolt holding that except the bracket. Goes on just like that, and it comes off. Okay, now we're going to disconnect. The wiring harness is screwed in right here, and we're going to take that screw out, and we're going to disconnect the grommet around that goes to the outside where the blower motor is. We're going to bring the wiring harness for the blower motor. We're going to disconnect this rubber, and then we're going to go on outside and start disconnecting the outside before we go ahead and unbolt the evaporator case. This is what we've done so far. Removed the insulation. We've undone the wire ties that hold it to the evaporator case and moved it away from it. Moved the two cables away from the housing so the housing is exposed. Then we're going to come back and we're going to go underneath and do the evaporator. Okay, now we're going to remove the screws. We're going to remove this cover. So there's a number of these screws right here, here, and here. We're going to disconnect this hose. We're going to lift this out of there. We're going to just unplug these. These just come out. This twists and comes out. You don't have to undo the hoses. Okay, we're going to undo this screw, and then we're going to go ahead and lift that out of. Okay, now that we've removed that housing, we'll come in here and we're going to remove the filter. If this is dirty, go ahead and replace it. Some are made of charcoal, some are made of paper. Here's the blower motor. We're going to disconnect the blower motor. We're going to unplug the connection. Notice this one is not connected to anything. When you're putting it back together, don't wonder where the other end is. We're going to just lift it out of here and unplug this. Then that wire is going to go back underneath, and that grommet from the inside, we're going to pull it through to disconnect the blower motor from that area. We're going to also remove the blower motor from these screws and take this out of there. It's got to come out, whether it's on the bench or here. It's just as easy to take it out right here. We're also going to detach the screws that hold the wiper assembly and wiper motor in place. The wiper motor assembly runs underneath here. We're going to take this molding off and remove these screws, take this wiper arm off and take these screws out. Remove this on both sides so that this is clear, and we'll gain access to the lower pan here. This pan right here. Okay, with the wiper assembly now removed, we've taken it out, and this mount here has to be removed, and then we're going to remove this lower tray to gain access to the heater hoses and the expansion valve. We were able to take the wiper assembly out in one piece. So you see, okay, underneath, we'll pull that out, giving us access to the expansion valve, and the heater hose connections. We're going to undo the heater hose connections and unscrew the expansion valve outlet connections, leaving the expansion valve in place. And then we have these bolts right here that are attached to the heater core, or to the evaporator case, and we're going to undo those. We have several of them. There's one, and we're going to undo those, and then we're going to go inside and undo the bottom evaporator case bolts. But right now we're going to go ahead and undo 3 heater hose connections and the expansion valve connection. Now we've undone the heater hoses, the 3 heater hoses, and we've undone the 10mm screw nut that held the tubes onto the expansion valve. We're going to leave that expansion valve on the evaporator and remove the whole assembly. We've removed the mounting there's 3 mounting screws for the evaporator case, and we've got those 3 disconnected. Okay, we're removing the cable from the blower motor from the evaporator case right out of there. Okay, we're just going to lay that aside, and now we're going to move these wires and go ahead. We've undone the evaporator case bolts outside. Now we're going to go to the inside ones. We're going to go to the inside case bolts, the lower ones, not the upper ones. The upper ones we're going to leave alone. We're just going to go to the lower ones. Now we're removing the last. There's 3 of these evaporator lower case bolts, and we're removing these bolts. That's the last of those. And there's a screw right here that you take out. It's for another one of the wiring brackets. So we're going to remove this screw and take this out of the way. We're going to go ahead and finish taking the final bolts loose on this bracket to remove it, and then we'll be ready to take the evaporator case. Okay, this bracket has a nut on the top. It has 2 nuts here that have to be loosened, that are right on the top. Once these are taken out, once we take out these 2 nuts and loosen these 2 back nuts here, we'll be able to move this bracket out of the way, and then we can remove this frame support. Now we've removed any wire ties to the harnesses here. We're also going to remove the evaporator sensor. Take it out, and we'll just leave it hang as we remove it. Okay, with it removed. Okay, now we'll just look around for any other connectors holding wires to the evaporator, and we're going to get ready to wiggle and pull the evaporator out. The evaporator case is ready to be pulled out. We're going to loosen a screw right here, and so we can remove this in our evaporator case. Sometimes these are in stiffer, but you can see it's loose now, and we're going to get ready to remove it. I'm going to take that one screw out to move that ductwork out of the way. Okay, now that we've taken the evaporator case out, and we're going to remove these clips in the front, and we're going to work on the screws, some of the screws, because this top section right here has to come off. Okay, we're going to undo these bolts and remove this framing, this support frame that goes around here. because the case is going to have to separate over here. We're going to come around here. We're going to disconnect. We're going to take this screw off here and off here and remove this housing. Okay, now we're going to come over here and remove these clips. Going to peel this insulation off. But first what we're going to do is take these screws out and remove the heater core. Take that heater core out of the way. We'll start that. Okay, remove the insulation from around the heater core, and now I'm going to reach in and remove this Phillips screw so I can remove this two-piece bracket. You can see it sort of pulls together, not real straight. So I'm going to remove that. That's a support that holds these tubes tight. And then we're going to also remove these screws and this bracket that holds the two halves together. Now we're going to remove this bracket by removing the fastening nut that goes through the case. It's a case bolt. I'm going to take out all the case bolts. The evaporator, once we've taken this bracket off, we can now, it pulls up and out of the case. Okay. Now we have the evaporator, the heater core. We have the heater core in hand. Now we're going to go to the rest of the parts on the case. We don't have to remove these screws or this, but we are going to take and separate this housing where the blower motor was. Then we're going to go ahead and remove any screws that are holding the case halves down, and little braces just along this line right here. We're not going to go very far. We're going to take this, this, and this. We're not going to start removing a whole bunch of stuff. We're just going to, as I do it, I'll show you what we do. This is a pretty easy job once you've done it, especially knowing that where pieces and parts go, because we're going to remove this bracket also now. Now we've just removed 5 screws attaching at the bottom. There were 2 screws of the blower motor housing, and when we look inside, there are 2 screws on here and on here. We're going to take these out, because what this does is join the case together. We're going to undo this outer housing and get to the screw inside here. I'm removing the clips and these screws along this base, just the clips. I'm not addressing any of these flaps. I'm just strictly taking the clips off here to separate the 2 halves. And then we're going to come around here and separate this bracket here. I've loosened where the heater core lines went. This is going to come off. It separates right across here. I'll take these off. And I'll show you as we go. Okay, now I'm going to remove, we've undone the clips to this housing here, this upper one. I'm going to remove this to gain access to these screws that continue to hold this flange. We've undone these and the clips across the front right here, and we're going to come around. I loosened this flap. I just loosened these screws, slid this out of the way so I could get the screw in here. Then we had a few screws back in here, but we have to make sure we're undone our screws and our clips across the edge. It goes down along here. We've taken off the bracket that runs across here. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to separate the 2 halves. It splits in here. We've taken out the support in between. There's a support that goes in here, and we've taken out the screw right here. We've taken out all the clips that hold that hold this together, the clips. All the clips are the same size, so you don't have to worry about mixing them up. Okay, we've removed one of the housings on this side, the evaporator case. We're coming across to this side, and now we've undone the clips and the screw. This particular evaporator case has a few differences from some of the others. We have to go inside the cover, that's why we had to undo a few of these screws. And right now we're going to remove this side, take this out of the way to gain access to a few more screws right in here. Okay, we're going to remove this button from the flap to this diaphragm as we separate the case halves. So we're going to take this out, and then we're separating the case right now, the two halves. This particular model requires some of the vacuum elements to be detached, and these are detached by taking a screwdriver, and you can connect onto these and then pry, and then they pop off. You just have to, in age, I'm sure these things are going to be, they come right off like this. So you can take them off. Examine these in case one of them gets pulled. Check and see that they're connected inside. You want to check your diaphragms while it's out of the car. We're getting ready to separate the two halves. You see that we have a green white goes on the top. The green ones go to the top. This is a green yellow. This is a red yellow. The two yellow ones, red at the bottom, green at the top. This is a red white, goes at the bottom, and this one at the top. Here also on this side we have a red one is to the center of the evaporator case, and the red one is to this outside. We've detached this red one from here. We're going to get ready to disconnect these right here and remove the top. Okay, now with the top removed, we lifted that top off. We expose the evaporator case, and you'll always be able to see where they've been leaking out of different areas. They'll get oily, they'll get corrosion. Some models require this piece to be added. This is an additional piece that fits in. So we'll remove that, and we'll get ready to install the new evaporator case, and everything that you've seen will be in a reverse. If you want to see it, just play this tape and read. Now I've set the new evaporator in place. The new evaporator comes with a plastic filler, and no longer will I need the foam that normally comes with these. Now I'm going to get ready to open this, and you always listen for a noise when you loosen these. If you don't hear vacuum like that, then you probably have a bad evaporator. You want to make sure that you have that sound before continuing on to put this evaporator in. If you do not have that sound, I recommend getting another evaporator. We're going to go ahead and get ready to put the cover on this, and I will be installing a new expansion valve before I put the evaporator case in the car. If the evaporator case, the filler, is, when you put it on, if it is loose after this is in place, and you have a slot here, So you have to make sure it lines up with the slot. You put it in. If it's loose in there, you want to take it back out and take some one-sided foam, sticky foam, and tape it right onto the edge of your filler, and that'll take up any movement of the evaporator. We're going to go ahead and remove these screws, and for reinstallation of the cover, because we're going to put this cover back on the evaporator case. Now we have the new evaporator, but in reinstalling we need to pull this filter up out of here, this foam silencer. We're going to remove that and then set the case. Now we've reassembled the evaporator case, and we're going to get ready to put it back in. The heater core is back in place. We've put the new expansion valve with 2 new O-rings on here, tightened it up. It will go in just the way it is. Earlier we had taken out the foam air dampener, sound deadener. We had taken that out to put the top on. We put our screws back into the case. The larger screws were used here, the larger diameter, on these metal frames. So when you look at your screws, there's 2 different thicknesses. This one gets the thicker diameter screw. We hooked up our vacuum lines, put all our clips back on here, and we're going to get ready to install it in the car. We're going to, before we install it, we're going to change these drain tubes. We're going to put new ones in regardless of the condition. We don't want it to leak. Everything else is pretty standard. What we're going to do, and everything's in reverse of what we disassembled. So we're going to go ahead and put this together. There's one other thing that we did do. We did on the this is the dash cover. There's the airbag, and the lower panel. We found we could remove this lower piece before taking the dash out, or we could leave it on, but it's easier to just go ahead and remove this and then remove the dash cover. You have 3 screws that you can access, and then the one in the corner. You have one in the corner, and once you've undone those, you can just drop this out of there, and it makes it easier to put the dash back in. So we're just going to get ready and put the evaporator back in the car. And okay, we're back to the car, and we're going to go ahead and install the evaporator, and this is the end of the tape.